I did some research on art and animation styles and learned that this technique was known as hyperrealism. Style intended to give intense, lifelike detail using traditional non-digital art methods. Some pieces of this genre were almost indistinguishable from the photographs. The lion wasn't quite that realistic. You could still tell it was easily, though it was a cartoon, yet it was somehow visually striking as a real photo of a lion. Continue my research, now focusing on finding people who were knowledgeable about this art form. I narrowed my search down to a few academics and animators and emailed the lion still. I got a response from one expert saying that the style reminded him of Juan Strobel, Austrian artist and animator who moved to the United States in the 1930s. He had worked for Disney briefly before starting his own animation studios. He was known for bizarre, deconstructionist approach to animation and had started his own anti-art movement of sorts. Animators and cartoonists trained at his studio produced their own bizarre work, which often include violent and grotesque themes, despite the fact that the studio ostensibly marketed to ostensibly marketed to children. The email went on to explain that Strobel became increasingly obsessed with magic and the occult during his career. He became less and less functional until his studio was forced to close due to bankruptcy. Curiously, the studio was known to produce only a handful of original works of its own. Apparently, the animators has spent a lot of time deconstructing and replicating the works of other companies, mainly Disney, since they were the only major animation studios at the time, and altering them to make them surreal or disturbing. This would have opened the company up to piracy claims, except that they were never sold such works to the public. Instead of gifting them to a handful of collectors with an anti-art elite community, Strobel also has self-published a book, a manual of sorts, which contain prints of some of his still cartoons and constructions on his technique. It was simply called Animation Deconstructed. I immediately determined to read it, but it took me ages to find a copy. Managed to track one down at the Rural Public Library headquarters 3 states away. The book was in their special archive collection, so I couldn't get it through the interlibrary loan. I had to drive there where they could allow me to examine their archives in the reading room. The room was sparse, dusty, and poorly lit. It had a feel of the 1950s police interrogation room. I was allowed to read the books of interest at the single table under the supervision of a librarian. It was yellowed, and the jacket was wrapped in protective plastic. The volume was short enough to read in an hour. Strobel was not good at English as he was drawing, so the self-published aspect really showed the numerous grammar errors. There was a couple of dozen prints in the book, all made in the unique hyperrealistic style. Again, they weren't photorealistic, unlike the other artists in the genre, but the depth of the details and the perspective made them appear alive all the same. None of them did anything paranormal or anything like that, but there was one that managed to seriously frighten me. It was a cartoon snake, a cobra with its fangs bared and a menacing look in its eye. You know how some paintings of people have the eyes painting in such ways as to give the expressions of the subject's gaze as following you as you view it in different angles. While this piece didn't do that, but it did have some similar things going on where the eyes of the snake appeared to bore right into your straight through the page. Felt like the snake was going to strike up and dig its fangs into my arm. I didn't have a trippy experience like with the lion animation, but it was still surreal and unnerving. In addition to the sections on art technique, Strobel also included a number of seemingly random place critics of the state of the animation that could generously generously be described as educated rants. A frequent target of his criticism, as was Walt Disney, whom he decried as an amateur buffoon who was holding back the animation medium to its true potential. The author went to empathize the need to be bold and daring in animations and willing to push social taboos. I returned to the volume to the librarian. I hadn't discovered anything that could help me with my search for the Aristocats tape, but at least I had come away from some interesting insights to the philosophy of the man who may have been behind it all. My next step was to visit Strobel's studios, which involved yet another cross-country road trip. I started to wonder how much gas money I would have ended up spending by the end of my search for that damned video. Was it really cheaper than flying? At least the studio was still standing, though I had arrived anticipating that anything of major interest would have still looted decades ago. Still, I held out hope as I pulled into a shopping center parking lot. The rest of my journey would have to be on foot since the studio had predated modern roads across the interstate. There only being only a traffic light, and found and followed the old dirt road that would have been the sole source of the vehicle traffic back then. By now, it was largely overgrown, and I cursed myself not to bringing a machete. It took me 2 hours to reach the location. It was a one-story wooden building, with its windows boarded up and the foliage growing all out of it. I walked the perimeter, looking for a way that it wouldn't open me up to the charges of breaking and entering, though I seriously doubt that anyone would ever know or care I had been in any case. To my disappointment, no entryway had been left by the previous urban explorers, and I had to hack away the boards of one window with the hatchet I had brought. It may have been easier to smash down the door, but that felt somewhat less ethical. There was, of course, no source of light except for the now open window way, but I had the foresight to bring 3 high-powered LED lamps in my backpack, which I now set up around the floor, relieved that I did not see anything scurrying or slithering. The place seemed smaller on the inside, barely more spacious than my basement at home. There was no furniture except a couple broken easels on the floor. They probably sold off the table and desk to pay off their debts. I thought some scuff marks were visible on the wooden floor. There was a low wooden partition that sectioned off a small segment of the room. I guessed that this was the administrative desk had been, while the rest of the floor was used for the actual animation work. Like I said, I hadn't really expecting to find anything important, but it was still disappointing. I spent the next couple of hours pacing the floor, wondering if the whole trip had been a waste of my time and mileage. I was about to pack up my lamps and leave when I discovered a trapdoor behind the floor partition. I had taken one of the lamps off the floor to perch it on top of the partition, and the light now allowed me to see the outline of the trapdoor, along with its hinges and latch. The door was about 3 feet by 2 feet. I grew excited and opened it. Knowingly, the door did not appear to have a mechanism for staying open, and it was too heavy for me to hold up. I had to back out through the window and back several times just to bring some rocks to prop it up. The contents of the compartment were worth it. The compartment was about 3 feet deep, and it contained what looked like diagrams for the animation or film devices, along with various little parts, knobs, bolts, lenses, and the like, all scattered at the bottom. I I studied these with fascination, but couldn't make heads or tails of this schematics. I tried fitting some of the parts together with no success. I decided against taking these items with me. I had rationalized that violating the law by entering this place unlawfully was worth pulling back this curtain or whatever caused my childhood drama. But these items were unlikely to be of value to that end, and thus stealing them for my own curiosity would go beyond the bounds of that justification. However, I did photograph each one of them just in case.